July the 5th this year sees the fulfillment of centuries of social legislation, when the new National Insurance Acts come into operation. For the first time, everyone, or almost everyone, in the United Kingdom can insure against want. There will be sickness and unemployment benefits, retirement pensions, maternity grants, death grants, widows' benefits, guardians' allowances, industrial injuries benefits. You'll pay 4 and 11 each week, and your employer another 4 and 2.
What? You mean I've got to pay all that every week?
Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few.
That was Churchill speaking in 1940, years before he became better known for selling car insurance.
Oh, yes.
He was actually talking about the Battle of Britain, but the phrase could equally well be used by his modern equivalent.
Never, in the field of financial services, was so much owed by so many. That's it.
As things stand, Britain has the world's second largest external debt. That's money owed to creditors outside the country, everyone from the US Treasury to the bloke Gordon Brown met at the G7 who lent him €2 for a coffee. So we are, in real terms, the world's second poorest nation, although you never get Ethiopian rock stars asking us if we know it's Christmas. Not that they get very far.
Humbug.
Latest official statistics put Britain's national debt at over £640 billion. That's more than £640,000 million, equivalent to over £10,500 for every person in the country.
Well done, Britain. You're in debt. You've borrowed against an unsustainable housing boom, and now you're facing a global recession and rising inflation, with unemployment and cuts in public services. Still, keep your head above water a bit longer, and you can retire on that nice fat pension you've saved up. You did save up, didn't you?
I take pensions extremely seriously because as of May 2010, I will be facing compulsory retirement. Maybe sooner.
Well, I think it was David Willits, or it might have been me, come to think of it, who said, and I've got it on tape here somewhere. Here it is. David Willits, 5th of July 2004. The scale and implications of the pensions crisis is still not understood, but I believe it's up there with terrorism or global warming as a threat to much of what we value. Well, there you are. You see, I know he's a Tory and he's a bit of a geek, and I wouldn't share a bath with him if he paid me, but basically he's right.
Once upon a time, not so very long ago, pensions held a respectable place in Britain's financial life. People were encouraged to save, either through their company pensions or with a range of worthy institutions.
I remember how my father would sit me on his knee and make me recite the names of all the pension companies. Prudential, my favourite, Friends Provident, Equitable Life, Scottish Amicable, Scottish Mutual, Scottish Trust Me I Know Your Dad, and so on. But, you know, looking back, when you think of the 60s, you think of 3 things. The Beatles, George Best, and people enrolling in defined benefit company pension schemes.
By 1967, over 12 million employees had company pensions, which guaranteed them as much as 2/3 of their final salary in retirement. Their future looked secure.
So, of course, it couldn't go on like that.
By the 1980s, while private schemes were amicable or equitable, company pensions became raidable, tradable, vulnerable, and no longer available. This is because as many of the great British companies with great British pension schemes, names like ICI, GEC, Toyota, no longer existed in their original form. In just 20 years from being a great success story, Britain's pensions had turned into a nightmare, with company pension schemes facing a deficit of around £518 billion. That's £518,000 million, almost the size of the national debt. Actually, we really need to do something about these figures. After a while, they just sound meaningless. So maybe we should use rhyming slang. You know, a million is a Prince William. A billion is a Gillian McKeith, kick in the teeth. And a trillion is a Ronaldo. No rhyme there. No reason either. Here to explain, let's meet him, let's greet him, let's get a knife and fork and eat him, our business editor, Robert Peston. Bob, how has this come about? Well, Hugh, it was perhaps inevitable that the accumulated savings of large numbers of people would attract the attentions of the profit-seeking, the rapacious, and the downright unscrupulous. But Robert Maxwell, who raided his company's pension fund to keep his business going, was merely the most high-profile, certainly the most wide-profile, of a number of businessmen and companies who exploited their workers' pensions on both sides of the Atlantic, or in his case, the middle of the Atlantic, where his complex financial affairs led to his final flotation in 1991. In the United States, it's a similar story, but without the happy ending. The US government's pension bailout scheme now covers 44 million citizens, and over the next 10 years, it'll need over $50 billion of state support. This summer, in an effort to plug that gap, it put the money into hedge funds.
Place your bets.
Faced with a series of compensation claims in the 1980s and 90s, British manufacturing company Turner & Newell and its US owners, Federal Mogul, decided not to contribute to the company's pension fund for the best part of 2 decades. This, and the stock market collapse of 2001, left the scheme with a black hole worth hundreds of millions of pounds. As the company filed for bankruptcy, Federal Mogul's top bondholder was about to pitch in £14 million a year to the fund for 3 years, when the UK's new pensions bill made it possible for Federal Mogul to offload the TNN pension scheme, with its £1.6 billion of liabilities, onto the British Pension Protection Fund, leaving us to provide for their retired workers. Federal Mogul later bought back the company's assets and returned to profitable trading, all of which proves that when the going gets tough, the tough get away with murder. Raiding Britain's pension funds didn't start with Robert Maxwell, and it certainly didn't end there. And it wasn't just individuals, but governments that were doing it. When Labour came to power in 1997, the Paymaster General was Geoffrey Robinson. Things really could only get better. Like his Labour colleagues Helen Liddell and Alistair Campbell, Robinson was once an employee of Maxwell. Together with Treasury colleagues Gordon Brown and Ed Balls, Robinson abolished tax relief on the dividends received by company pension schemes, a sleight of hand which was designed to bring a large cash windfall to the Treasury. It caused one revenue official to gush, "This is something I wanted to do all my life! Brilliant, Chancellor! Brilliant, Paymaster!"
Now you see, that's the sort of people we're dealing with. You know, some people grow up wanting to be astronauts, others want to drive supersonic trains. I wanted to join the Royal Ballet. But this guy wanted to abolish tax relief on company pension dividends. It was all he wanted to do, his lifetime's ambition. So whatever floats your boat.
The effect was to further weaken Britain's company pension funds and deal another grave blow to the golden goose. When campaigning MP Frank Field pointed this out to Tony Blair, Blair was taken aback, saying, "Golly, well, Gordon never explained it like that."
That's because you weren't listening, arse.
Well, you see, I can remember a time, not so very long ago, when company pensions were an admirable, socially responsible means of provision for the workers. Whereas now they're seen as a burdensome liability on the company's balance sheet. Oh, they want to get rid of them, dispose of them as easily as possible. Scandalous.
Eager to take on the burden, and more particularly the potential for making profit from the large accumulated savings, were a new breed of private equity companies with names like Lucida, named after a typeface, and Cerberus, named after the Hound from Hell. The business of pensions had moved from the world of industrial engineering to the world of financial engineering, where pension funds now trade in derivatives like inflation futures, essentially gambling for grannies.
And how?
It was a something for nothing, a win-win. It seemed to make sense at the time, as did a lot of things when shares and property were going up and everyone benefited.
So, in a sense, Britain partied like it was tax year 1999, 2000, without worrying too much about what happened after we left office. Unfortunately, when I left the Chancellor's office, I ended up in the next one along, with blame me on the door.
Now, he wasn't the first Chancellor to see Britain's company pension funds as a lucrative cash cow. It was a tradition going back to Nigel Lawson. With his daughter's eye for books and cooking and a good recipe for profit, Lawson spotted that companies were building up surplus cash in their pension schemes. Surpluses which he could usefully take in tax. So in 1988, he made companies cut any surplus cash in their pension funds back to a safety cushion of just 5% over their liabilities. As a result, tax revenues shot up by more than £1 billion a year. Instead of money languishing in pension funds, it was either reinvested in the company or taken in tax.
After all, business is business.
It was the paradox of thrift.
Robert, it sounds like something from J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter and the Paradox of Thrift. Can you explain?
Well, Hugh, the paradox of thrift is the idea that money that's simply put away and saved isn't actually doing any work. And you'd be much better off ploughing that money back into business, building a bigger pie. Remember, this is Nigella Lawson we're talking about, and getting a bigger slice of that pie at the end as a result. So, companies and individuals stopped paying in, taking so-called pensions holidays instead. But as with all good holidays, the problem is, Hugh, that you don't want to have to go back to the dull life you had before. So the pensions holiday slowly became a pensions sabbatical and eventually a fully fledged pensions early retirement.
I see, and what was the effect?
You really want to know?
No, but do go on.
Well, with money ploughed back into the company rather than the pension scheme, profits actually grew. And this is the extraordinary bit, pension schemes which held shares in those companies got richer too.
Get away. So, the idea was to make the money work harder?
Absolutely. Because if there's one thing Gordon Brown can't stand, it's money standing around doing nothing. Which is why, in 1999, he spotted Britain's gold reserves lounging around in the vaults of the Bank of England, sitting on their arse with a fag in their mouth, and sent them out to do some work. He sold off 395 tons at $275 an ounce, making a cool $3.5 billion. Though, if he'd held onto them, they'd now be worth an even cooler $12.5 billion.
So much for prudence.
But let's go back to company pension funds, which is what chancellors did time and time again when they needed cash in a hurry. First Lawson, then Norman Lamont, and ultimately Gordon Brown. Instead of relying on the company for their pension, workers turned to the stock market. What could be more reliable? But there were warning signs. As the 80s continued, companies and individuals stopped paying in, taking payments holidays instead. And in just 10 years, company contributions had virtually halved. What made things even worse was a series of disastrous miscalculations. Firstly, government actuaries and pensions experts failed to spot that people were living much longer. Now, all this was a bit strange because the ability to predict life expectancy has been around for some time. And we British have been rather good at it. Since the 17th century, in fact, when Edmund Halley, famous for a bit of rock around the solar system, as opposed to Bill Haley, famous for a bit of rock around the clock, developed a nifty little sideline to his astrology career by publishing the first and remarkably accurate life expectancy tables. He also pioneered deep-sea diving, paid for the publishing of Isaac Newton's work on gravity, and released a string of minor hit singles. Sorry, that was the other one. 300 years after Halley, 50 mathematical geniuses with a very large computer and no theory of gravity to support sat in the government statistical office and managed to get the sums alarmingly wrong by about a third, estimating that people would survive, on average, 15 years after retirement, instead of 19.
It turns out the sums were wrong. I think the officials actually misread one report, which suggested that in future there'd be more and more pensioners who were ill. In fact, it said there'd be more and more pensioners who were 111. So while we thought we could pass more of the burden of pensions from the state to the company pension sector and bring down our spending as a result, the actual projection, as opposed to the actuaries' projection, was that we'd have to spend 70% more than we thought on pensions by 2050. But of course I won't be around then, so the actuaries tell me.
It wasn't the only mistake. By 2001, officials at the DWP were working so hard they actually counted figures for private pensions twice. As a result, they calculated that individuals were contributing a healthy £86 billion, or 9% of their income, to pensions. But others, led by Tory pensions expert David Two Brains Willits, worked out that the individual savings figure was less than half that, at £40 billion. According to a recent report, there's now an £80 billion deficit in the country's private pension provisions. It was time for dire measures, and by 2006, plans were underway to extend the retirement age to 68.
Well, of course, my great hero on this was Lloyd George. He set the pension age at 70, which is nice and high. But even better, this was at a time when life expectancy was 48. That's the way to do it. So If we were to do that today, we could set the retirement age at 126.
But the good news is, if you're a politician or a civil servant, you have an inflation-linked final salary pension, paid for by the taxpayer.
Thank you very much.
I must say I'm a bit surprised to see you here, is it?
Well, I'm here every day.
No, isn't this the week you usually go to the Canaries?
Oh, well, we're just having the one holiday this year. The fact is, Audrey and I, drawing in our horns a bit. We're looking into a pensioner's black hole.
You're going back to Bournemouth then, are you?
No, I'm talking about money.
Oh, it's the credit crunch again, is it? Oh, I shouldn't worry too much. It does have advantages. You know, you can get some wonderful bargains now. I saw that Saga are offering an all-in week in Afghanistan for £45, and that includes a folklore display.
Well, it's worth thinking about. Audrey quite likes the sound of gunfire. It's having been brought up on a farm, you know. But it's not so much the credit crunch, it's my pension I'm worried about.
Oh, don't talk to me about pensions. Apparently, we're sitting on a demographic time bomb.
A time bomb. Demographic, it's a real crisis. I mean, you used to get these advertisements on daytime television for pension companies.
That's right. Laughing, silver-haired couples sitting on their verandas, downing tequila sunrises.
Yes, well, apparently that's a picture of life in retirement which you won't be getting anymore.
I remember 40 years ago, everybody thought the biggest social problem we were going to have was how to cope with all the leisure time we'd have.
That's right. The country was full of 65-year-olds taking up archaeology and abseiling.
Learning Sanskrit.
Yes.
And firing pottery in their home kilns.
Yes, there's an article in here which says that if a 30-year-old today was going to have a decent retirement, he's going to have to start saving 27% of his wages every month for the rest of his life. I remember the government saying, it was only about, 10 years ago, that our occupational pension schemes are one of the great welfare success stories. I remember the phrase, one of the great welfare success stories. Well, I thought at the time, well, that's all right then.
Yes, well, I mean, a lot of people thought that's all right then, didn't
So
they?
they were lying to us all that time.
No, they weren't lying. No, Paris thought, no, they were just being very, very stupid. They got all their sums wrong.
Yes, but didn't they steal from our pensions as well?
Well, they didn't steal exactly. They just took money that wasn't theirs.
That's fine. I always thought that was stealing.
Except they thought that somehow the money would still be there, so it wouldn't matter.
Well, now that is quite clever if you can pull it off, isn't it?
But they couldn't. I mean, we're lucky we're already retired, thank God. You've got your pension from the bank, haven't you? That's safe.
Well, is it? Is it, though? How do I know they'll keep paying it? They might find a way out of it.
Well, that would fly in the face of every principle of financial probity. What makes you think they'd do anything like that?
Because they're a bank. I should know. I worked for them for 40 years.
Well, have they said anything to you?
No. Well, they wouldn't, though. They wouldn't. They'd just wait till the last minute, and then they'd spring it on you. That's what I used to do when I was bank manager. I'd wait till somebody had bought a house or had twins or something, call them in, pull the plug.
But you know what I can't understand? I mean, we're supposed to be the fourth richest country in the world.
Yeah.
Not many years ago, people could look forward to a decent pension as a matter of course. Now they all say pensions are unaffordable. Why?
Well, they're not unaffordable for everybody. Who's that man who ran Northern Rock?
Yes.
When he was kicked out, he got a pension pot of £2.6 million. That's about £300,000 a year.
Well, that's nice.
Actually, it says here in this article, where is it? Yes, they did a survey of 100 top British companies, and apparently their senior executives can expect to retire at 60 with an average pension of £193,000 a year. Average worker's pension is £7,500.
Still, as I say, your pension from the bank is safe enough.
Well, I'm not so sure. A couple of weeks ago, I read where my old bank had sacked their finance director.
What for?
Well, last year he invested £3 billion in subprime mortgages, lost the lot, naturally.
Well, that's got nothing to do with your pension,
Well,
does it?
well, because they made him take early retirement. And they've given him a pension of $500,000 a year as compensation.
Compensation for what?
Well, for losing them £3 billion. And he's only 38, so if he lives to be 80, they'll end up paying him £21 million. Now, that money's got to come from somewhere. It most likely will be my pension.
Well, it's a possibility, I suppose.
Well, I don't see why they have to give him all that money at all.
Oh, well, it would have been in his contract. They had to do that to get somebody as clever as him to take the job in the first place.
Well, he didn't turn out all that clever if he lost them £3 billion.
But he was cleverer than you, Leslie, because he's got the pension and you haven't.
That's true, I suppose.
But what about the rest of us? Have we been saving? Is the Pope a Muslim? According to the Office for National Statistics, household savings have actually gone negative for the first time for half a century. Well, with house prices booming and the stock market climbing, why save when you can invest instead? Exactly.
And in any case, according to the paradox of thrift, money tied up in savings is wasted when it could be out there earning more money. So why not make your money work for you? Try your hand at a little investment. It certainly worked for this happy senior citizen.
$62 billion would mean nearly 8 million years' worth of our weekly state pension. And a hell of a queue at the post office. So what can you do instead? Well, we took advantage of the boom in easy credit to borrow more and more money.
And here they come now, led by the massed ranks of iPod players. Behind them, in perfect step, the 52-inch plasma screen purchasers, proud heads held high, followed by the courageous men and women of Bid Up TV, and in their wake, a woman with a new pair of trainers. Heads turn now as they pass by the Queen and salute. She responds as only Her Majesty can by having another go on her Wii Sports.
With credit this cheap, Britain could indulge in its national sport, spending like there was no tomorrow.
One of my first acts at the Treasury was to make Tomorrow Never Comes a key part of our economic strategy. But it was glossed over in the excitement about an independent Bank of England.
But now tomorrow's here, and it's brought some sobering figures. While earnings have risen by less than a third since 2000, the amount of money we owe as individuals,
As opposed to the amount you owe as part of the national debt.
has more than doubled to a staggering £1.4 trillion. This means that on average, every adult in the United Kingdom owes £26,000 on their mortgage and a further £5,000 on their credit card. And as half of us don't have mortgages, the burden of debt for the rest that do is much higher. The result of all this borrowing is that not only have we run down our pensions and savings, but we now have unprecedented levels of debt and insolvency. Yes, so far from being a wise strategy, leaving pensions in the lap of the stock market was a bit like relying on a forgetful monkey to pack an uneaten banana in your lunchbox. But at least we can rely on the government to have behaved sensibly.
Well, of course, prudence is my middle name.
And yet, as it turns out, the government is also in debt, by even more than we are.
No, actually, if you take away the figures for PFI and the pensions and the bank bailout, it comes down to a much more manageable £28.36.
The national debt officially stands at £645 billion. There it is there, up to 645. But that's a conservative estimate, conservative with a small c being a government figure. The Conservatives with a big C put the real size of our national debt at £1.85 trillion, even more than we already owe as individuals.
No, that's cheating. That's if you include PFI and pensions and Network Rail and Bradford and Bingley. We don't include those in the figures.
But isn't that cheating?
No more boom and bust.
In fact, if you include bailing out the banks last month,
which we don't,
the total comes to more than £2.3 trillion. There it is up there. That's over 1.5 times what the whole country earns in a year. That's over £96,000 for every household. So it seems that under a prudent Chancellor, we've accumulated the largest debt in our history.
Ka-ching! January 2007, we hit £500 billion for the first time ever, a record. And it's carried on going up since then. Imagine how bad it could have been if I hadn't been prudent.
Feeling the pinch? Anxious about inflation, public services, bank bailouts, Trident, war, pensions all piling in? Why not consolidate all your liabilities into just one huge amount and settle it the easy way in 52 weekly payments? Chancellor's debt keeps us in credit even if it leaves you penniless.
So who do we owe this debt to? Well, it's the debt the government has accumulated over the years and includes stuff that it's bought that it can't afford yet.
Ah, now I wondered when we'd come to that. What's PFI? Well, Hugh, it depends who you talk to. According to the Treasury, it's a way of getting spending off the balance sheet. According to the National Audit Office, it's pseudo-scientific mumbo-jumbo where the financial modelling takes over from thinking. According to Edward Lee, chair of the Public Accounts Committee, it's the unacceptable face of capitalism. In any case, the P stands for patently, the I for idiotic, and I think you can probably guess what the F stands for. Afraid I can't.
For Gordon Brown, PFI was just what he needed. In 1997, he announced his golden rule of not borrowing more than 40% of GDP in any economic cycle. But faced with the need to rebuild Britain's crumbling infrastructure of schools and hospitals, he couldn't do it without breaking his rule.
The important thing is I won't break rules. I'll bend rules, hide them, pretend I've lost them, bury them, powder them, stamp on them, melt the rules down and recast them into a different rule, put them in a picture frame and pretend they're bits of art, kidnap them and demand a ransom from myself for them, run rules over in my car and reverse back over them to make sure they've been properly squished. But I will not break them.
So having tried all those methods, unsuccessfully, he found a way to get round it. A way that had been invented by Norman Lamont, the man who also came up with Black Wednesday.
Today has been an extremely difficult and turbulent day.
It allowed Tony Blair to boast of the success of apparently building hospitals on time and under budget.
New schools, new trust schools, new city academies. New hospitals, new Queen Elizabeth Hospital, new school building where I laid the foundation stone. The new academy in Liverpool, more secondary schools, more primary schools. So why and how? It was me. I spoke to a woman the other day, she said, and actually liked saying something very simple. Thank you. It was you that gave the British people all that we've achieved, Prime Minister. So thank you, thank you. You are a remarkable man, a remarkable servant to this country. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank me, Prime Minister.
But the cost wasn't met out of that year's budget. Instead, it remained to be paid for years to come.
OK, let me get this straight. You'd like to build the new Forth Road Bridge, and you're going to charge me more than it costs to build the most expensive bridge anywhere in the world. I like the sound of that.
Well, now, in polls, 80% of the public were against it. 80%. Well, that's only because they didn't understand it. If they did, 100% would be against it. But a lot of schools and hospitals had no choice. I mean, they were told by Alan Milburn, smarmy git, never liked him, they were told it's PFI or bust. Well, he was wrong. They got both.
OK, let me tell you where I'm at. You want me to let you build and run a hospital trust, with all that entails. But you've never run anything like that before.
OK, I'm in.
So who benefits? Well, Hugh, the public get their hospital or their school, and it'll be their children who are left with a bill. But the investors do very well indeed.
Oh, go on, Bob, give us an example.
Well, Hugh, if you put in just £100 at the start of the Hare Myers Hospital contract in Scotland, you stand to make a profit of £89 million over the next 30 years.
Golly, so who gets that?
The investors, either individuals or consortia. But just imagine, Hugh, if the government had sold bonds to pension funds to finance those PFI schemes and reap the profit for future pensions.
Brilliant. Have they done that?
No.
Oh, no, that really would have been prudent.
Look, I know it's easy to say that the private sector has profited hugely through a combination of consumer borrowing and public spending, but that's only because it's true.
PFI does throw up a lot of curiosities. In 2001, the government sold off a number of government buildings, now worth £1 billion, to an offshore property company. Amongst the properties they sold off was the Inland Revenue. The Inland Revenue?
Nothing important.
More recently, a controlling interest in that property firm has been bought by a New York private equity and hedge fund manager. So hang on, the Inland Revenue building is now owned by the manager of a hedge fund.
I can't talk about it. It's privet.
But there's a twist in the PFI tale. With credit incredibly difficult to find in the current crisis, some PFI deals aren't looking such bargains for the contractor after all, saving the taxpayer from financial exposure.
Brilliant.
Except if it does go belly up, as happened with Metronet and the Tube, then the taxpayer foots the bill. And when PFI contractors suffer, investors suffer, and that's often pension funds. So it's a double whammy.
Not so brilliant.
But the problem with PFI is the bill doesn't come now, but later, with 30 years of repayments on hospitals and schools and defence. So the rich, who got richer courtesy of banking and the housing boom, become even richer thanks to PFI and pension dealings. Only last month, Lloyds TSB, about to receive £5.5 billion of taxpayers' money, joined forces to buy Porterbrook. That was the company that bought Britain's trains off the government for just £73 million in 1996. It was sold later that year for £825 million, and twice since, once for £1.4 billion and now £2 billion. So we just paid £2 billion for a company we sold in 1996 for £73 million, a profit of 2,700%.
OK, so you build the school, rent it out to the Education Authority for 30 years, after which you turn it into a hotel. You got yourself a deal. I'm prepared to offer you a £50 million contract to run a public service. And for that, I'll put in £5 million for your lawyers. OK, so that's consultancy fees, management fees, accountancy fees, revised contract fees, plus another number, plus another very large number, plus an even larger number you can't even tell me, and a 10% contingency allowance, and that's to maintain my local bus shelter. OK, let's do it. OK, here's my offer. I ask you how much profit you're going to make, and in return, you tell me to bugger off and mind my own business. Take it or leave it.
As we approach 12 years of Labour government, borrowing is looking dangerously out of control.
How much? I owe all that. Northern Rock, Bradford and Bingley, bank recapitalisation, liquidity fund, PFI, pensions, inflation, recession, Olympics, departmental budgets. Oh, shit.
And the tragedy is, you see, while all this was happening, no one worried. For 10 years, the press celebrated excess. Oh, it was all wonderful. We'd replaced the manifesto with the Sunday Times rich list. And because it was New Labour, we got away with it. People thought it was different.
Still, if it's any comfort, in America, the picture's even more alarming. Debt there has now broken the $10 trillion barrier. What does that mean? Well, the first thing it meant was that the debt clock in New York's Times Square ran out of room for the noughts. After the bailout of mortgage companies Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, 40% of American mortgages are now underwritten by the government. Likewise, 40% of private pension funds have defaulted and rely on the state. And there's only one way to pay for all this, and that's tax. Except there's another paradox, because pretty much anything that can be taxed has been taxed, and any more taxation could reduce productivity and create less, not more, money to spend. And no one ever won an election by saying they'd raise tax.
Well, I might have said that, but by mistake.
Well, I mean, it's outrageous. Last year, 8 of Britain's biggest companies claimed they didn't have to pay anything because their feet were off the ground when they were given the tax bill.
Several leading British businessmen have called for the government to introduce lower taxes, but some aren't prepared to wait.
London's got some of the finest people in the world. Only this year I appointed Sir Martin Sorrell as chair of my International Business Council. And straight away he's announced he's moving his company to Ireland. You can't get much more international than that. And from there, he can tell people how good Britain is. For the third of the year, you're allowed to live here.
But you can't tax these high earners in the city for the simple reason that if you did, they'd move abroad and ruin someone else's economy.
But that's ridiculous. I mean, it's bananas. Ah, funny you should mention that. Here's a hand of bananas. Now, for every £1 bunch of bananas in the shops,
the figures break down like this. 13 pence to the growing country, 1.5p for labour, 10.5p in costs, and 1p in profit. 8p to a Cayman company for use of the purchasing network, profit raised, no tax. 17 pence to Bermuda for use of the distribution network, profit, no tax. 8 pence to Luxembourg for use of financial services. 4p to Ireland for use of the brand, profit, reduced tax. 4p to the Isle of Man for insurance, profit, no tax. 6 pence to Jersey for management services, profit, no tax. Sold to the UK retailer, that's you and me, Hugh, at a cost, no profit, no tax, for 60p. The retailer sells them on for £1 with a 39p markup for costs, declaring a profit of just 1p.
I see, so by keeping all the profit offshore in tax havens, the manufacturer pays no UK tax. And provided it stays there, it remains lawfully tax-free.
Exactly.
Oh, well, thanks a bunch. Robert Peston there. You can catch him on iPlayer if you want.
The basic trouble is we're all living too long.
Yes, as they've just found out, much to everyone's surprise. Well, there's not much we can do about that.
Oh, I don't know. We could all move to East Glasgow and we'd die at 53.
You mean if I was living in Glasgow, I'd have already been dead for 19 years?
Yes, Gordon Brown would love that. Yes. He'd be beside himself. You mark my words, it won't be long before you see government campaigns to promote unhealthy lifestyles.
Really? Yes.
Certainly. Ring NHS Direct for advice on taking up smoking again. Obesity clubs. Eat until you can't walk.
The trouble with those things is they take too long to have any effect. I mean, the pension crisis is here today.
No, that's far too negative an attitude for this government. They'll come up with subsidised free-fall parachute jumping for the over-70s. Anything dangerous. Things to do before you die.
Yes, or while you die.
Or while you die. That would get the pensioner population down a bit, wouldn't it?
Roof jumping, whatever that thing's called. Formula One motor racing.
Well, Audrey would go in for that, wouldn't she?
Oh, yes, very much so. Very much. She was done for speeding in 1972. So.
It would be a bit tricky, though, getting her into Formula One at this stage in her life.
Yes, it would. It'd be quite tricky, actually, getting her into the car. I mean, much of her will be overflowing the cockpit.
And the aerodynamic properties would go by the board.
Very, very much, yes. I think the only parts of Formula One she could manage would be the orgies.
Orgies?
Yeah, you know, Max Mosley has these orgies. I mean, even then she might find herself a bit out of breath.
Well, it's not too late. You should map out a strategy. First thing, get a job.
Well, who's going to give me a job at my age?
Well, there's B&Q. I mean, they have a policy where they take on clapped-out old people.
Yeah.
So there you are. Join B&Q, start selling lawnmowers or whatever it is, work your way up, get a seat on the board, do something which nearly ruins them, and then stand by for the big payoff.
Bit of a tall order, isn't it? I'm not sure I've got enough time left to do all that.
Well, what about football?
Football?
Yeah, you could become a Premier League manager, and then all you have to do is lose 3 matches in a row, and you get the sack and £5 million.
That's good. It's quite an easy job from what I've seen on television. I mean, you just run up and down the touchline, and you occasionally shout things like, "Oi, Wazza, get tighter."
And you can ask Mr. Patel for advice on the finer points. He has a football background.
Mr. Patel at the village shop?
Well, of course, Mr. Patel at the village shop. How many Mr. Patels do we know? When he was 17, he played left back for the Islamabad junior jihadists.
Yes, well, I'll certainly give some consideration to your suggestions, but I have to say I am rather dubious.
The thing is, the situation's not going to get any better.
No.
There are already more people over 60 in Britain than there are under 16.
We're just a burden on the public finances, unless we start dying sooner.
The trouble is, that us old people, you know, in a modern society, were essentially pointless.
Essentially what?
Pointless!
Pointless, sorry, yes.
In more primitive cultures, we'd be passing on skills to the younger generation. I mean, if we lived in the Amazon jungle, you and I would be teaching our grandchildren how to kill monkeys with a blowpipe.
Which is absolutely vital for them, isn't it? Yes.
They'd be incredibly grateful for that.
They would.
I mean, my grandchildren aren't the slightest bit interested in learning how to kill monkeys with a blowpipe.
Well, just as well you don't know how to do it then.
Yeah, all they're interested in is how to get to level 3 in Grand Theft Auto. And I don't know that either.
No. So one way and another, we probably don't deserve a pension anyway.
Probably not.
The first old age pension, a few shillings a week for the over 70s, came into force in 1908. Other measures were on the way. 1911, First National Insurance Act. 1920, Second Unemployment Insurance Act. 1925, Contributory Pensions Act. 1930, Poor Law Act. 1934, Third Unemployment Act. 1936, National Health Insurance Act. 1941, Beveridge Report.
So what can we do to ensure a decent pension? Well, shop around. But here's another paradox. The healthier and more responsible you are, the worse deal you're likely to get. According to advice given by Legal & General on the BBC's Money Box programme, people in deprived areas can expect bigger annuities.
You have to remember here, we're acting in a very competitive marketplace, and so what we hope is by this initiative we will get more customers coming to Legal & General.
Ultimately, people who live in areas where they are expected to live a long time, people who've lived healthy and presumably wealthier lives, will end up getting less for their annuities. That must be the ultimate conclusion.
They will get less per annum than the individual that's basically living in the poor areas.
And so what's next? Annuities related to obesity or diet or how much you drink?
Quite possibly, yes. Some insurance companies will already offer a better annuity if you're a smoker. Over time, I think more factors will be introduced. Things like obesity could come into it, the job you do, all sorts of things that could come into the equation.
Or better still, why not move to Glasgow? Oh, hi! Come along! All your favourite risk factors in one great city! People are dying to live here! Oh, hi!
It may even be worth your while developing a condition which will improve your annuity. Take a look at Norwich Union.
If you're one of the many people who don't have a perfect bill of health, you might qualify for our enhanced pension annuity. We also take what we call lifestyle conditions into consideration. These are factors which can affect your health, like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, obesity and smoking. So it is worth talking to your financial advisor about your lifestyle and health to see what you could get. Enhanced rates if you have a combination of at least 2 out of 4 lifestyle conditions. In some circumstances, increases to rates could be 100% or more, so it's well worth discussing your health.
Enhanced, presumably, meaning that the insurance company gets enhanced profit. Although you can, of course, if you're not on the primary list, you can qualify if you've got a combination of at least 2 out of the 4 lifestyle conditions. So if you've got high cholesterol and you're obese. So, go for it.
Just a very little sip.
So there's a huge financial incentive for pensioners to really let their hair down, what's left of it, and binge drink, smoke, move to a dodgy area, collect ASBOs. We'd have a whole new generation of social delinquents. Saga louts.
Why not take up a pastime in readiness for your retirement? Like heavy smoking or drinking, or solvent abuse, or an exciting new sport, like lion wrestling, shark polo, or volcano surfing. You've done your bit, and now you deserve a rest, ideally in a box. And your pension company is there to help, with an attractive range of inducements.
Enhanced annuity plans are a perfect example of money at its silliest. The market has worked out there's a good return to be made in approaching the fat and the indolent and the 60-a-day man and saying, look, you're going to an early grave, we'd like to help. Although it does throw up a moral conundrum, how do pension companies know that someone who claimed to be obese or a smoker was telling the truth?
OK, look, here's a good one. We take the entire tax revenue of £500 billion and put it on an 8-to-1 shot at Newmarket. Now, if that wins, we're sorted, provided the bookie's good for £4 trillion.
With rising debt and pensions either taken over by private equity or gambled in hedge funds, what's to be done?
No, all right, here we go, my last go. We all pay our tax early. In fact, we all overpay our tax early. I mean, it's brilliant. Look, the money is safe. It's with the Treasury. It's safer than any bank. You cut out the middleman. Plus, we can pay off the national debt. And when the country recovers, as it will do, quickly with all the cash sloshing around, you can reclaim your overpayments as a tax rebate. No, come on, it took me 20 minutes to come up with that.
A few weeks ago, David Blunkett offered some cheery advice.
I think people should work until such time as they become incapacitated.
Or become an embarrassment to themselves or the government.
Stop that, I'll set the dog on you.
But it would solve another problem.
With the pound in freefall and exchange rates falling, Britain is becoming less and less attractive for foreign workers from the Eurozone, while outsourcing abroad is less cost-effective, which means any day soon we'll be awash with those unskilled, menial jobs ideal for the army of pensioners stuck at home wondering what to do with their time. And as overseas call centre workers flood back home, who better to work there than the infirm, who like nothing better than to sit down answering the phone all day?
Or if pensioners find they can't pay council tax, they could always go to prison. What do they call those prisons for low-risk inmates, you know, where you're allowed to wander around a bit? That's it, nursing homes.
And that way, we wouldn't have to pay the winter fuel allowance.
Or even better than that, we could start thinking about euthanasia. Well, you laugh, but we're already doing it. Thanks to SARS and MRSA and C. difficile, we've got some of the best systems of euthanasia in Europe. They're called hospitals. But don't have nightmares, you'll probably die before you get there.
Next week, if it's the markets that rule our lives, what price politics?
Phew. Only a scheme like this can afford you such high benefits. Come on now, it's worth it, isn't it?
Every penny of it. I'm just in time to find out all about it before the scheme starts. You can get the address of your national insurance place from the post office.